Colombia's repression continues against peaceful demonstrators. In India, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to run rampant as the nation registers more than 4,000 COVID-19 related fatalities for the third consecutive day. On Friday, the Israeli regime continues its attacks against Gaza's civilian populations as the death toll now climbs to 119. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Fray Gomez from teleSUR Studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We'll begin with the news. Stay with us. In Colombia, state repression continues against demonstrators in Buga, Cauca Valley. Demonstrators continues in the early hours of Friday morning, and even health organizations and human rights volunteers were repressed with tear gas. Social movements blocked the roads at the Canada Buga with the city of Cali to protest against Duque's government. Despite the systematic crackdown, human rights organizations continue in the streets collecting complaints and advocating for the right to protest and the integrity of citizens. Human rights organization Chamberlain's figures show that 362 people have been victims of physical violence throughout the country. There are reports of several homicides presumably committed by security forces and 16 cases of sexual violence. So far, more than 1,000 demonstrators have been arbitrarily detained. Meanwhile, in Colombia's capital city, the police cracked down on demonstrators with water tanks and portals de las Americas, the terminal of the Transmillennium transit system of Bogota, as well as the southwest of the city. Nationwide, demonstrators against the tax reform continue strong after 15 days demonstrations that have now turned into a social outburst demanding an end to human rights violations and a structural change in Colombia. Also in the city of Popayán, a young woman named Alice Melendez committed suicide after being detained and suffering sexual violence by agents of the anti-riot squadron. Human rights groups issued a statement in which they repudiate the crime and demand justice from the authorities. In the images, we can see the moment when Alice Melendez was detained on Wednesday night. Different women's organizations are demanding that Duque's government, the chief of police, and the national prosecutor investigate the case as a possible femicide. The Commission of Guarantees and Human Rights in Cauca demanded a prompt and truthful investigation to clarify this serious crime. Given this situation, Colombian feminist organizations are holding a sit-in this Friday in different cities of the South American country. Bear it in mind, to express the rejection to sexual violence that police agents have committed against women in the framework of the national strike. According to the announcement received by the Grita, or Screen platform, within the 2,100 cases of police violence committed since the beginning of the national strike, last April 28 to date, there have been at least 16 acts of sexual violence against women. The latest case was that of the 17-year-old woman who was arrested on Wednesday night by police officers in the city of Popayán, capital of the department of Cauca, while she was filming the demonstrations taking place there. The minor was taken to an immediate detention unit where she denounced that she was subjected to sexual abuse by several police officers. On Thursday, she was released and later found dead after allegedly committing suicide, according to the feminist collective Casa de la Mujer.
Disculpa, ¿cuál es tu nombre?
And Ecuador social movements and workers in the transport sector have protested against the recent decrease of fuel decreased by the government. Representatives of the transport sector denounced that the government of Moreno has failed to comply with the process of dialogue with the guilds of this sector. Social movements also joined the rejection of the measure that is part of the package of conditions requested by the International Monetary Fund to the government of Lenín Moreno. The increase of 44% of the price of fuel has effect after the band of prices approved by President Lenín Moreno in July last year, which implies a progressive increase of the prices of fuel in the country based on international prices. This Friday, President Alberto Fernandez and the head of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, met the city of Rome as part of a fourth and last stop of Fernandez's tour. The Argentine head of state said that during the meeting, both parties agreed to reach an agreement as quickly as possible on the renegotiation of the debt, without demanding greater efforts from the Argentine people already enduring hard times due to the pandemic and the economy. President Fernandez said that next week he will talk to the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. The Argentine government is seeking to postpone this year's debt payments to the IMF in the context of the pandemic, when resources are limited and those available are relocated to purchase vaccines and to strengthen the health systems. The government of Cuba reported that the agricultural sector had a loss of more than $300 million between April and December 2020 due to the United States economic blockade. The Ministry of Agriculture reported that the coercive measures of Washington affected the acquisition of raw materials and the national and international marketing of agricultural products. The governmental body also said that faced with the threat of sanctions imposed by the United States, it was difficult to position products such as charcoal, coffee, tobacco, and honey in the international market.
In order to have an idea, we have calculated in this period of time that we have an affection amounting to more than $330 million, and of that $330 million, just because of the losing of exports erasing, we are talking about $194.4 million.
We'll be back back after this very short break, so don't go away. And indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to run rampant as the nation registers more than 4,000 COVID-19 related fatalities for a third consecutive day. Health authorities at the nation also reported a slight decrease in the number of daily infections, with over 343,000 COVID-19 cases in the last 24 hours. Today, India registers more than 262,000 COVID-19 deaths, and with the latest reports of daily cases, the country surpassed the 24 million cases, making it the second hardest hit nation by the pandemic in the world after the United States. The situation is especially serious in India's hinterland, where in some places bodies are being buried in shallow graves or given up to the rivers, and the sick have little hope other than herbal remedies and amateur doctors. More than 100 corpses that have washed up on the banks of the river Ganges in the recent days that suggest the situation is equally dire elsewhere in the country. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus has said Friday the COVID-19 pandemic's second year is on track to be its deadliest.
COVID-19 has already cost more than 3.3 million lives, and we're on track for the second year of this pandemic to be far more deadly than the first. Saving lives and livelihoods with a combination of public health measures and vaccination, not one or the other, is the only way out of the pandemic.
In Chile, final preparations are underway for the elections to be held this May 15th and 16th. In this process, Chileans will elect the members of the Constitutional Convention as well as regional and local authorities. 140 million voters are called to participate in these elections, where regional governors, mayors, and council members will be elected, as well as the 155 members of the Constitutional Convention, the body charged with drafting a new constitution to replace that which has been in place since the Pinochet dictatorship. It should be recalled that this historic move comes as the result of the widespread massive mobilizations of Chileans from October 2019 onwards to demand fundamental changes in the country. There are more 20,000 candidates standing in the polls. The elections, which were postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, are being held over 2 days in order to avoid crowding at polling stations.
This is a very important election, maybe the most important in several years, and studies show that this election will be very similar to the plebiscite of October 2020. That is, one of 2 Chileans is showing intentions to go to the polls. It might be 50 or 51% of electoral participation. We have 4 elections this weekend, but the election that is more important for Chileans is the Constitutional Convention, where we will be able to write, for the first time and in a democratic way, a new constitution.
It is a great possibility for the country to rewrite history and leave to future generations something prosperous, something that everyone wants.
The National Electoral Council of Venezuela called regional and municipal elections for November 21, 2021. The president of the National Electoral Council, Pedro Calzadilla, stressed that the call for electoral activity was unanimously approved by the Directory of the Electoral Power. Calzadilla emphasized that the ruling of the electoral body is contemplated in the constitutional framework that emanates joint elections of governors, mayors, and legislators of legislative councils for this year, 2021. The CNA's top authority indicated that the electoral campaign process will begin on October the 28th and end on November the 18th.
The election campaign will begin on 28 October and end on 18 November, on the eve of the election to be held on 21 November as announced.
This Thursday in Iran, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps prevented an attempted terrorist attack in a border area of the country almost a month before the presidential election. The Emir al-Mominin Brigade seized a large quantity of weapons in a mountainous and difficult-to-access area in the western province of Elam, bordering Iraq. According to a statement issued by the brigade, the terrorists had moved the weapons to the area with the purpose of preparing for terrorist attacks in Iran ahead of the presidential elections scheduled for June the 18th. The success of the mission was the result of a sophisticated intelligence operation performed by the brigade that made possible the arrest of 3 suspects. In Chad, the transitional government has called on the Front for Change and Concord rebel group to surrender its weapons. The request was issued by Chad's Minister of National Reconciliation and Dialogue. The official said that this gesture would pave the way for talks to resolve the crisis in the country. He added that a mission of the African Union has committed itself to transmit a message to the rebels and claimed that the group is supported by foreign countries. The latest crisis in Chad erupted after the death of President Idriss Déby Itno, caused by ones of he received on the battlefront against rebels. The president's death led to the dissolution of the government and parliament and the installation of a military junta. We have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. On Friday, a Palestinian family integrated by the pregnant woman, her husband, and 4 children were killed by Israeli airstrike. Residents said that the strikes came with a warning late at night. The victims were a pregnant woman, like I said, her husband, and 4 children, as an Israeli warplane reduced a building to rubble. The owner of the building and his wife were also killed. The northeastern Gaza Strip came under heavy bombardment late Thursday and early Friday as Palestinian families fled to neighborhoods on the outskirts of Gaza City. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination and Humanitarian Affairs, Israeli airstrikes have destroyed or severely damaged more than 200 homes in the Gaza Strip, while 24 schools have been damaged. Also, Israel has massed troops along the border and called up 9,000 reservists. The Gaza Health Ministry said the toll from the attacks has risen to 119 killed, including 31 children and 19 women, with 830 wounded. Palestinian resistant missiles have reportedly reached the Nevatim Israeli Air Force Base, according to Hamas armed wing, the Qassam Brigades. The Israeli media confirmed the attacks. The air base is located in the Negev Desert in the northeastern part of occupied Palestine. The military wing of Hamas said it has begun using the new rocket that enables it to hit any point in Israel. Hamas military chief Mohammed Deif called for international airline companies to immediately cease their flights to any airport in Israeli-occupied Palestine, spokesperson said. According to Lebanese agency Al Majidin, the occupation is using internationally banned weapons against Palestinians amid pleas for the International Criminal Court to investigate the matter. The number of dead Palestinians recorded since the beginning of the latest Israeli airstrikes on the Gaza Strip has increased to 118, including 31 children and 15 women, while the number of injuries is around 830, and the figures continue to rise. Local media have reported that Israeli ships, artillery, and aviation are now simultaneously shelling the eastern and western regions of the northern Gaza Strip, in addition to cutting off electricity supplies in large areas of the north of the Strip. Palestinian families living in Gaza's Shijaya neighborhood have been forced to leave after Israeli forces shelled the area. Israel has bombed Gaza for 4 days now and deployed extra troops to the border as the Palestinian resistance movements mobilize to defend the Strip. As the violence escalated, Israel security forces scrambled to contain deadly riots and Jewish extremists attacked Arab Palestinians in Israel. Balls of flames rose high into the sky after strikes smashed into densely packed Gaza on Thursday night, and Palestinian families rushed to find safety.
There is a lot of shelling, and the children are all afraid. Even us, adults, have been in war since our childhood. We're afraid and cannot bear it anymore.
The situation is difficult for us in Chehaya. Everyone is fleeing. There are shells falling on the houses. My relatives called me and told everyone to evacuate Chehaya. We are now leaving.
Palestinian families have taken shelter in a UN school in Gaza City after fleeing from their homes in the town of Beit Lahia. Sources said that people were evacuating their homes in the northeastern part of a besieged the Gaza Strip ahead of further Israeli attacks. Meanwhile, the Palestinian resistance movement, Hamas, has warned of a heavy response to a possible ground incursion by Israeli forces. Goodbye.